I'm Dr. Kim, and we're going to talk about anxiety and thyroid. No explanation needed about why we talk about anxiety in December, but why would thyroid go with anxiety? And what exactly is anxiety? And when we're looking at it clinically, from a lab perspective, what are we looking for? When we look at clinically what's going on, what do we want to look for? What do we want to see in order to make the right lifestyle changes, to make the right supplementation into the body to correct what is going on with the physiological processes that are imbalanced? And what can we do long term to really reverse the cycle of anxiety? And is it really rooted in a thyroid dysfunction? And it's such a complicated, convoluted topic, and that's why we had to break it down: anxiety, depression, and thyroid, and talk about how all of them work together, but also the need to know each of them individually. So anxiety is a fear response based on your past experience, your current view of what is in front of you in this situation, and your view of self. So anxiety is not merely a sympathetic response because the bear is chasing you, or you heard a noise, or you read something on Facebook that made you mad, or you listened to talk radio and you got mad. That's not anxiety, where you entered into a building that made you anxious, and now you have all of these heart palpitations, you get isolated in your thoughts, and you can't move forward. All of that happens, but it's not just a base response. That base response comes from all of your past experiences and what you currently see is going on and how you view yourself in light of past experiences and current situation. That's where anxiety comes from. So it's rarely just something that we want to pay attention to the chemicals only, because the chemicals that are involved absolutely influence the physiological output, the physiological changes, but the thoughts and the amygdala firing, that fear response, that amygdala response, truly is one of the things that we want to go in and reroute in order to get rid of anxiety. When we're testing in a lab for anxiety and thyroid and what's going on functionally in the body, what we're looking for is neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are fast-acting, short-acting, local chemicals that tell the brain and the gut to do something. That's overall the ones that we're looking for, the ones that are in the brain and in the gut. We aren't testing neurotransmitters specifically, we're testing their byproducts most of the time. What we're looking for, the chemicals that we're looking for specifically, are serotonin. Serotonin is widely known to be associated with anxiety and depression, but not only anxiety and depression, it's associated with being able to sleep soundly, because tryptophan turns into 5-HTP, 5-HTP turns into melatonin. So when we don't have the correct amino acids in the brain for balance, we aren't going to have the right chemical output, and so the physiological symptoms will manifest. That's basically how all of this happens. We don't have the appropriate balance of proteins or fatty acids, and then the chemical reactions can't happen appropriately, and then we have a physical manifestation of what is going on. Now, what drives that chemical imbalance, what drives that deficiency or overproduction, is stimulation and thought. So overall, that's what is happening. So serotonin is really in control in the way that I view it of your peacefulness. It's how you feel at peace. It's not just your happiness chemical. It's the thing that keeps you on an even keel. Because when I read about dopamine is what makes you happy. Dopamine is the reward center. Dopamine is your yes. And so you want more of that. That's your reward center. And so when we have a flatness, when we don't feel rewarded, when we don't feel like we are happy, I really tend to lean into dopamine a little bit more. And when I'm looking at your lifestyle, I want to see what it is that you're doing to get your dopamine stimulation. Are you reaching for gluten? Are you reaching for carbohydrates or sugar or salt or video games, Pinterest, Facebook? Are you trying to make sure that you have all of the likes, how many hearts did you get, how many likes did you get, how many people paid attention, how many people watched your video. These are all dopamine stimulators. And so when I'm looking at lifestyle choices, when I ask these questions in office, what I'm looking for is, do we need to lean into serotonin? Do we need to lean into dopamine? Especially if you forego the testing, I need to know what your coping mechanisms are. And so that's why we ask about that. Dopamine also influences your ability to have great memory and to have really smooth movement. So dopamine is very important globally in the body. But when we're talking about anxiety and depression, it's our reward center. When we have an overstimulation of dopamine and we constantly need more dopamine, that's where our addictions come in. That's also why you see the little kids addicted to devices, addicted to video games. It is an actual clear addiction, and it's a dopamine response. It's a dopaminergic response in the brain. So that's one of the neurochemicals that we'll be looking for if we do lab testing. GABA is an inhibitory chemical in the body. Helps you sleep, helps you rest, helps you find the quiet space. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are adrenaline, noradrenaline. They are your fight or flight response. It also helps you have motivation to complete a task. You know, like if you're fighting or flighting in this stress response, you have the motivation and the energy to complete what is happening. So when you begin to have a decrease in norepinephrine or the conversion of norepinephrine to epinephrine, you can actually have a failure to want to follow through. So that's one of the reasons that we look at that, particularly with depression, even more so than anxiety. Glycine is an inhibitory chemical. It helps you find calm, it helps with memory, and helps with sleep. That's another one that we want to pay attention to for anxiety in particular, because when we have that inhibitory chemical out of balance with the excitatory chemicals, which are epinephrine, glutamate, and histamine, when we have that imbalance, that's when we're going to have a lot of those weirdo effects that don't seem to make any sense in the body, because you have a imbalance between sympathetic fight or flight and I'm exhausted, I can't get going, I don't have any motivation to keep going. Which looks like thyroid, hence why we talk about thyroid when we talk about anxiety and depression. The symptoms all look so very much the same, which is why testing and examination and history and really digging into the details is so important. So when you're asked in a functional medicine office, when you're asked for your diet, hopefully they're not just looking about how many calories you ate. We're looking at where they came from and why are you choosing those calories, because why you're choosing those calories can help us understand better what's going on chemically in the body. And help us figure out what you need to do next in order to break the cycle and live the life that you really want to live. Glutamate, like I mentioned, is an excitatory neurotoxin. And what glutamate does is it fires off, if you remember that chemical concussion pattern from the Alzheimer's talk, glutamate fires off a chemical concussion. So anytime you're eating at Zaxby's, Chick-fil-A, you have that addiction to it, you have that drive to it, but then you feel like kind of crappy afterwards and you don't really remember things too much. That's your glutamate. Happens all the time in Chinese restaurants, and they'll say there's no MSG, monosodium glutamate, in it anymore, but there are now 30 different names for glutamate. Glutamate is a headache trigger. There are all sorts of things that go along with hyperactivity of glutamate. It is an excitoneurotoxin. It is a big issue. In your daily food. It is also stimulated with the blue screens, with the blue light from the screens, with all of the devices, because it is an excitatory neuron in the brain. So when you have the stimulation from our screens all the day that tell us to do something, the blue light tells your brain to do something, fire. It's got, we got stuff to do, yeah, we got stuff to do, yeah. When you have all of that bombarded at you for 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day, it creates this excitatory cascade in your brain that sets it on fire, basically, that creates this anxiety response, that creates protein mismaking and creates protein misfolds that lead to concussive-like symptoms in the brain. creating memory problems, creating all sorts of issues. So glutamate is a really big deal for anxiety, histamine as well. So if you're always taking an antihistamine, it's not because your allergies are out of whack, it's because your gut is broke. You don't make enough of histamine ACE, if you want to call it that. It's diamine oxidase. But you don't make enough of the chemical in your gut because it's broken that you can break down histamine. So if you're always taking an antihistamine, you're always going to feel drowsy because histamine is delicately interwoven into the sleep-wake cycle. It stimulates appetite, has issues with headaches and allergies. So again, there are no boxes. That's what, if there's anything I can help you understand in the body and in life, there are no boxes. Everything weaves together. And when you are trying to balance out a chemical, when you're trying to balance out a symptom with a chemical, you're going to have a cascade of other problems because in the body there are no boxes. Everything works together or it doesn't. So how do these imbalances manifest in the body, and why does it look like thyroid? Well, remember that thyroid is ultimately in control of the cellular activity, cellular metabolism. We've gotten into the bad habit of thinking that thyroid is responsible for me being fat or for me being skinny or for me having goiter. Like, those are the three things that we think about thyroid, and it is a gross mislabeling of what thyroid is and does in the body. Thyroid makes sure that your body has energy, your cells have energy to work. So when your thyroid isn't working properly, not it's optimal and we're checking TSH is broken, now you have thyroid problems according to the lab work. That's called frank disease, and there's a big gap between I'm working beautifully and frank disease. This is where all of the problems happen. By the time you're at frank disease, you've been dysfunctional for 30 years and nobody's cared. So that's why we want to pay attention to this, because there's a big gap between optimal and broke. And the medical community in general offices and regular everyday conventional medicine doesn't pay attention to optimal and broke. Nothing in between. It's either working fine or it's broken. And it doesn't matter if you have symptoms. It does matter if you have symptoms, because the symptoms tell us when there is a dysregulation within the brain and the body, with your diet, with your inputs. So what are those manifestations? What are those outputs look like when you have serotonin or neurotransmitter dysfunction? It looks like thyroid problems. I can't gain weight. I can't lose weight. I have heart palpitations. My blood pressure is doing all the things all over the place. I can't poop, or I poop all the time. I swing back and forth from a can't poop to a do poop to a don't poop to, oh my gosh, it's diarrhea. All sorts of digestive problems. Again, that goes back to serotonin and your epinephrine, norepinephrine. We go from being really angry to being super happy, or we just stay super happy, or we get really depressed and low and we don't do anything. You're achy and you're painful all over. You can withdraw from people. Again, going back to that anxiety, that view of self plays into that withdrawal from people so often. And so you can withdraw, or quite the opposite, you'll dump yourself into everybody so that you're not alone. And so we're looking at those manifestations. Another manifestation is, what do you snack on? What do you grab? What's your coping mechanism? That's a manifestation of the root issue. Are you grabbing beer or are you grabbing wine? Those are two different desires from the brain. Are you grabbing sweet versus salty? Those are two different desires from the body. Are you reaching for a dopaminergic response? Are you reaching for a serotonin driver? So that's why we have this big picture of what's going on when we look at anxiety, thyroid, and pretty much anything that's going on in the body. So if you do struggle with anxiety, if you do have any of those manifestations, what can you do on a daily, regular basis to help as a tool to combat the manifestations while we work on getting rid of the anxiety itself? We work with CBD, L-theanine, parsley, 5-HTP or serotonin, mucuna, ashwagandha, holy basil. We're working on things that will address the neurotransmitter dysfunction, and the cortisol dysfunction, the stress response dysfunction. So we try to support that system in the body with those supplements, with those tools to help feed back into the system to give the appropriate chemicals so the appropriate responses can happen. That's what supplements are. When they are well given, when they are well assessed, supplements can be life-changing. And that's where the testing comes in. Nobody wants to fork out the money for testing, but otherwise you're going to fork out the money for supplements that we're guessing at symptoms. And as you can see, the symptoms can be incredibly misleading because high looks like low, low looks like high, and that's why it's so imperative to do the testing when we want to figure out what the root cause is. Otherwise, we're just throwing supplements at it, and I'm not a big fan of that. One thing that you can do, this is really fun that I learned in nerd school, is you can actually shut off a anxiety attack by saying no. So you're going to fix your eyes on a point and you're going to do no-nos. So isn't it so interesting? This is how I have part of one of the reasons that I have come up with serotonin is about peace. Serotonin is not happy because dopamine is yes. So you can stimulate dopamine by saying yes with your eyes fixed on a point. You can stimulate serotonin by having your eyes fixed on a point and saying no. And so no, we're always saying no when something in our environment disrupts what we have as truth inside. And so when you are saying your no's, you want to find a happy memory, something that makes you feel really good inside. One of those quick memories, and you just want to remind yourself of that over and over, that happy memory when you are in the middle of a panic attack. So for me, when I walk into Costco on Sunday and it is a complete nightmare, you might see me going no, or saccades, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, because that's going to stimulate a serotonin response that will calm you down and bring peace. So no-nos or saccades, quick back and forth, or deep breathing in for 4, hold for 4, out for 8. That can slow that anxiety attack, that panic attack in the moment. Also, on our lifestyle, you want to decrease your screen time. Get off Facebook. Get off Pinterest. Get off Instagram. Just walk away. Give yourself 2 times a day. 2 times a day that you can hop on Facebook. 2 times a day that you can hop on the gram. 2 times a day, because you are driving your anxiety all day long, not only from the screens and the radiation, but you're driving that perfectionistic idea of what is right. And that is also why this book is so amazing, The Gifts of Imperfection. It will help you work through some of those issues with anxiety. So that is absolutely some of the things that you can do for the long-term work. We're looking at that view of self, processing past experiences, and being able to shift perspective in current circumstance. So we do that with counseling or hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is wonderful. I have a great guy if you want some suggestions for hypnotherapy here in the Cherokee area, or a gratitude and perspective shift, a gratitude journal, changing the way that you see things, shifting your verbiage from mean is funny to gracious and generous words changes your brain. Let me say that again. Shifting your words from sarcasm and complaining and harassing and trying to be funny, but you're being mean. Shifting those words to generous words changes your brain. It actually lights it up. Whereas the negative talk, whether it's intended for humor or not, the negative talk actually shuts it down. So making fun of people turns your brain dark. You don't want a dark brain, okay? Making fun of people turns your brain dark. Being sarcastic turns off the light in your brain. We have to use words of generosity because that wires the brain for gratitude, wires the brain for happiness, wires the brain for the life that you really wanted, okay? So those are our short-term, long-term goals for anxiety and depression. Again, anxiety is a fear response, a firing of the amygdala in light of our past experiences, our current circumstance, and our view of self. So in order to really deal with anxiety, we must deal with those 3 things, along with the neurochemicals, to see what is driving that chemical response, and see what we can do to intervene with it. If you have any questions, I'd love to be able to answer them. You can message me. I'll leave Jorgen's information. He's my hypnotherapist, in the comments. And I hope that you are finding some of this really helpful. If you want to do any testing, just let me know and we can get that all set up for you if you are really ready to take steps, lifestyle steps, toward the life that you really wanted, and figuring out why you don't have it. Because it's more than chemicals. It's more than blood work. And I'd love to be able to step into that and help you find what you've been looking for your whole life. Thanks so much.